Hi everybody, this is Damien from Legend Life. With our Bucket List Talks, we look to share with you interviews with travelers, travel experts, and founders of travel companies to get their ideas, insights, and inspiration to help you plan and live your own bucket list. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Liz Wright. Liz is a traveler, writer, and speaker. She's also the author of a book called Bare Naked Nomad. So today she's going to share a little bit about her experience in traveling through 30 countries and also give her ideas, tips, and suggestions so you can go off and also travel on a bucket, on a budget, and then also travel solo. So how are you going today, Liz?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Very good.
Excited. Yeah.
Awesome. So well, to get started, maybe you can give us a little bit of background about yourself, and have you always been into travel?
So I grew up I grew up in California in the Bay Area, and I had a very large family, meaning blended family, 10 kids. So travel was not really something we did as a family, other than maybe a camping trip once a summer nearby. That was pretty much it. So not even Disneyland. Like, that's how deprived I was as a kid.
Yeah.
And so my first travel experience was visiting my dad. My parents were divorced when I was pretty young, and I visited him in Arizona. And so he drove us over the border from Arizona into the little town of Nogales, Mexico, when I was about 13 or 14. And that was really kind of my first international travel experience, if you could even call it that. But even just that little sort of 10-minute walk over the border just opened my eyes to just a completely different culture and completely different world. And it kind of started that little travel bug for me. When I was 17, as a senior in high school, I participated in a French exchange program. So as I said, I didn't have much money growing up, so I baked my way to Paris, selling, pies through the church and local community places and stuff like that to raise the money. And I ended up doing an exchange program. So we hosted a French student at my house for 2 or 3 weeks. I can't remember the exact time frame. And then she went home, and then I went and stayed with her family for about the same amount of time period. And so that was my first trip, like overseas, abroad by myself. And it was amazing to just be over there. I think we took the tube over into England. So I got to get to two countries at 17. And that was just really sort of what opened my eyes to this world that was out there. And when I came home from that, I went to college. I came out to Utah to go to college, and got a job working in the travel industry. So I worked for quite a few different hotel brands. And so that just kind of kept feeding that, because I would always be online looking at these hotels and booking hotels for other people. And then I'd start kind of doing a little bit of research on the location of that hotel. And I'm like, wow, this is a really fun thing to do.
Yeah.
So that ended me into sort of a vacation concierge type of role. I worked for Marriott at the time as I was going through college. And so I was kind of still planning these vacations for other people, but living vicariously through them. And so it wasn't until, and I tried every route there was. I applied to go on Survivor. I applied on Amazing Race. I tried all of these different avenues to get myself out there. And it was just not happening fast enough for me.
Yeah.
And so I knew I was 29 at that point, and I was like, I got to do something different with my life. And that was about the time I was actually in real estate at that point in time. And of course, that was sort of the period that we're in with COVID. That was a big crash that we had in 2008 and 2009.
Yeah.
And so I found myself in Florida and waitressing, and again, not living the life that I wanted to live. And so in honor of my 30th birthday, I just put the goal out there that I was going to go travel to 30 countries, and I didn't care how long that was going to take, but that was my goal basically towards turning 30.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And I got a job I had moved out to South Florida at that point, and I got a job working on a private yacht. And they basically set me off into Spain, and all of a sudden I was in the Mediterranean and I was traveling. So that's really kind of what started my whole like full-time travel adventures.
Yep. So that trip to the Mediterranean was where you went on and did the next 29 odd countries. So
yeah, over the next decade. So it took me 18 months. I traveled consecutively from that point that I flew out to Spain. And then I had to come home again for, I had some family medical issues going on here. So I came back to Utah, and then just ever since then, I've been sort of back and forth. I did a trip through Central America on my own, and then a lot of traveling through the US, obviously, especially during COVID. So I've been to almost all 50 states. I still have about, I think I have like 5 states left, 5 or 6 states left, and then I have seen all of the United States, which is a pretty cool thing for me, because not very many people have done that either, unless you're like in the military or something like that.
Yeah.
So.
No, awesome achievement. So with the places you've been, what would be your top 3 destinations?
That's kind of a hard question, because it's kind of like asking like who your favorite child is if you have kids, because they all kind of offer something special and unique. But Morocco was definitely very high up on the list for me. And I think it was just because of the diversity there. There are so many, from, going into the Sahara Desert to, Essaouira, the little coastal town, to up in the mountains, you're in this little blue, tiny little Smurf town. It looks like a bunch of Smurfs live there. And it was just like, I ended up, a lot of places that I go to, I end up staying a lot longer than I originally planned.
Yeah.
And so I just really love taking the time to explore a place versus just trying to say, okay, I've been here in a week and now let's go to the next place. If there's something that I have not seen yet and I want to see, I'd rather take that time and see it then versus be like, oh, I can always come back later. Because the way that I view it, and especially as I've gotten older and kind of seen my parents age and, other people kind of go through their own health things, you don't really know what time you have. And you don't really know what's promised to you. And so I just try to live life as fully as possible in the moment when I can.
Yeah.
And so Morocco is really high up on their list. I loved my experience traveling through. I have Polish heritage. And so one of the things that I did that was really special was tracking down relatives that I still had living in the south of Poland. And so it's kind of a unique experience to me, but really kind of, to my heart, and really, really special for my family, because, a lot of answered questions that were kind of lingering for decades that our family didn't know what had happened. I did have a great grandmother that passed away at Auschwitz, and we didn't really know the story behind that. Yeah. So being able to kind of experience that and learn that history about her was really kind of special for me and my family. And then I'd say another top one for me was Guatemala. I loved Central America, but just that Guatemala was so, Central America is beautiful.
Yeah.
But Guatemala just kind of still had that, like, not quite as touristy sort of vacation vibe to it. You still had people walking around with baskets of sticks on their heads and doing their laundry in the rivers and things like that. And just a beautiful, beautiful country, very, very, very kind people. So those are kind of my top experience, I guess, so far. But
when you're traveling, what kind of travel do you do? So do you look to have some adventure, or is it cultural experiences which you're kind of looking for? So what really kind of like draws you or to experience a place?
All of the above. So the big draw for me, like Guatemala, Nicaragua, they're all kind of interrelated, but I always try to do something a little bit more off the gringo path of that's what they would say there.
Yeah.
Just to make myself feel unique and special, even though maybe it's not that special, and sometimes it's probably a little bit more dangerous than some people have the comfort level for. Like for example, crossing over from Central America into Nicaragua, there's two ways you can go, right? You can go the route where everybody takes the bus and you cross over with all the other gringos on the bus and you go over that route and you get there safely. Or you can go the eastern approach, which basically you cross over a river by boat and you're border crossing through a boat to get into Nicaragua.
Yeah.
And there's sharks supposedly in the river. So that just sounds more adventurous and exciting to me than, getting on a bus and going over a border crossing. But, it also leads to like a lot more, it doesn't go as smoothly as you would expect either. So I try to immerse myself into the culture as much as I can, but also look for adventure as much as I can at the same time. So I'm very much into, if there's some kind of, I did like volcano boarding while I was in Nicaragua, which was awesome. I did the same thing in the Sahara Desert, sandboarding, I guess. And, just there's a book I love called What I Was Doing While You Were Breeding. And it's by a woman. I don't know if you've heard of it. But it's by a woman that basically, Kristen Newman, I think is her name. And basically she has a saying in the book that I like to do the thing that you're supposed to do in the place that you're supposed to do it at. So meaning, if you're in Italy, you have to go have a gelato and you have to have a, espresso or whatever from an Italian coffee shop.
Yeah.
But also, what is there to do, taking cooking classes, for example, or a lot of my style of travel, I did some couch surfing, which was really kind of unique and special too, because it gave me an opportunity to really meet the locals, the people that live there, and to kind of have that experience and, cooking and kind of breaking bread with them, as opposed to just staying in a fancy hotel and, seeing the country from, inside of a tour book, so to speak. I like to hit all those tour points, absolutely, but I also like to try to immerse myself and learn as much as I can about the culture as I can.
Yeah, no, very good. No, it's true. Like when you go to a new country, it's always better to be with the locals because you really get a feel for the place. And then they also take you to things that may not be on the tourist travel list, but actually are pretty cool experiences. So fully on board with that. So what would be some of your most memorable moments, things that, always come to mind, or when you're talking about your travels, you want to kind of like share the experience because it was something, pretty amazing?
So in Marrakesh, they have what they call a hammam, which initially I thought was just like a massage. I was like, oh, okay, $5 for a massage. Cool, that sounds awesome. And I had met these two guys from, I think they're from Amsterdam or something, and they were kind of going there anyway. So I was like, okay, I'll tag along with you guys. And we get there, and a hammam is like a full-on scrub down shower, like where you strip down naked and they get out like brushes and like scrub all the dead skin and all the dirt off of you. And you get a little kind of a massage at the beginning of it. And then they're like, okay, go into this room and take your clothes off. And you're like, what the? And then because I'm with these two guys, they are assuming that I'm in a somewhat Middle Eastern country, right? With their kind of culture and everything. They're expecting that I'm like one of their wives or something. And so once they found out that we were just friends and had just met each other, they just completely were like, oh, like she can't be in here with you. We have to separate everyone out. And but it's an experience that you wouldn't really have anywhere else. Another one of my favorite experiences was in Scotland. I was there over their Hogmanay festival, which is their festival basically for New Year's Eve. It's like it's a, what do you call it? Like they have a candlestick that you light. And it's like, it takes you back to like the 18th or 17th century when everybody's walking around with, a torch in their hands, and you feel like it was just amazing. It was just amazing to see, you know, the entire hillside with these little lights, and you know, and it's like a 3-day sort of party after that.
Okay.
And then I don't know, there's so many. I was also Morocco, I'm going to bring up again. And that's probably why it's one of my favorite countries, is because I've had so many varied experiences there. But I was there during their El Hadji, I don't know the official Arabic term for it, but it's their sheep festival. So think of it sort of like Thanksgiving or something here in the US, where instead of a Thanksgiving turkey, they go and buy a sheep for their family.
Yeah.
And instead of that sheep being purchased and nicely slaughtered at the store that you just take home and put in the oven to roast, they have a live sheep that they strap to the top of their car, and they bring it home, and, you know, they feed the sheep for like a week and create this like special relationship with it. And then all of a sudden, the morning where the festival starts, they're in their kitchen, and, you know, there's blood running out the front door, and you know, and they they make sure that every single part of that sheep is used throughout the festival. So there's no waste. And, you know, it's kind of a bloody graphic type of thing if you were to just envision it in your own eyes. But to be there during it and to be invited, I was invited into 2 different families' homes during that I just sort of met in, you know, various shops or, you know, on trains and things like that. And it was really cool to just be a part of their family celebration and to kind of learn the meaning of it, you know, from them versus what you might see on the news or the interpretation that somebody else might have of it that is not familiar with the culture.
Yeah.
So those are some of my top.
No, very
ones.
cool.
Yeah.
So what about any moments where you were kind of like questioning if you'd made the right choice? You know, as you said, you like to go off the beaten path a little bit and take a little bit more kind of like an adventurous view to your travel. So have there been any moments where you go, oh my God, I wish, or you felt a little bit uncertain, concerned about a choice you made?
Yeah, there have been a few of those. Going back to the border crossing in Nicaragua. So that was the way locals crossed into the country. And it wasn't, so we're in the middle of the water, and this guy comes rowing up to the side of the boat with a black bag that's all taped up. And I'd met a girl from Germany on my travel, so we were traveling together. I wasn't completely by myself. And she knew a little bit of Spanish, but I saw some white powder sort of the corner of this bag. And she's like, oh, I'm sure it's just flour or something, you know, local farmer. And I'm like, dude, that is not flour. Like, we're essentially like in the middle of a drug trafficking like boat route, essentially, before they cross over the border. So that was kind of scary, just because, you know, we are the only, you know, we are like 2 blonde girls sitting on this boat, and anything could have happened. It didn't, but, you know, they could have tried to like plant it in our bag or something like that, and, you know, something drastic could have happened. I did have an experience in Egypt where, and this is where safety is such a huge thing, especially when you're solo traveling, and sort of listening to that initial gut reaction that you have. If something's telling you not to do something, don't ignore it. Listen to that initial gut reaction. And I had an experience where I was in Cairo, and I was trying to get down to Hurghada to meet a friend to do some diving. And I was just like 5 minutes from missing my bus heading down there. And so I grabbed a cab outside of the hotel, knowing, okay, if I get in the cab, it'll get me there that much quicker, and I'll make sure I get to the bus in time, even though it was only a couple blocks away. And this was a local cab, so it wasn't a tourist cab. And I didn't even think about it, but I just, you know, I hailed it, I hopped in, and I'm thinking like, I know I shouldn't get this, but it's fine, it's only a couple blocks away. Well, the local, this cab driver, I'm trying to say this as like ungraphically as I can, but he essentially asked if I was married. So he was kind of doing this thing with his ring finger. And I'm like, yes, I'm married. Yes, yes. And at that point, I wasn't wearing a ring or anything. He wasn't asking if I was married. He was asking to do something else completely different. completely inappropriate. And I looked over and he had actually like revealed himself fully, like from his pants down. And I had so much adrenaline once I realized that that was the situation. You know, I had a coffee and like a breakfast roll in my hand from the hotel, and I threw the coffee at him and I said, no, bus station right there. And I can't remember the term, but a friend of mine who I had met in Miami was from Egypt, and she had told me the same, like, if anybody ever does anything inappropriate, say this to them. And it's the equivalent of saying God would be ashamed of you, or Allah would be ashamed. And I said that to him, and I yanked the steering wheel. And at that point, he was like, there's an on-ramp going up like onto a freeway, or he could turn this way to go to where the bus station was and where the bus was waiting. And at that point, he started turning left to go onto this on-ramp. And I grabbed, after I threw the coffee, I grabbed the steering wheel. I'm glad I was in the front seat. They always say never to get in the front seat, but I'm glad that I was in the front seat because I was able to take control of the situation. And I grabbed the steering wheel and I, you know, yanked the car and it went that direction while he's like, ah, from the coffee I just thrown at him. And luckily I got out unscathed. I grabbed my suitcase. My adrenaline is pumping through my body, obviously, and I get on the bus and the bus pulls away and I was out of there. But my biggest thing, and I always tell people, like, you know, you shouldn't be afraid to travel solo, which you shouldn't, but you also have to sort of have some common sense about you, and you have to use your better judgment. You know, I knew better. Number one, I should have planned and been out there so I wasn't rushing, you know, to miss my bus to begin with. I should have given myself plenty of time to just make the walk and get there and not worry about missing a bus. But number two, I knew, my friend was like, if you see those vans, don't get in them. They're local, like they'll try to rip you off. But I ignored that. And it was like, well, it's right here. I just need to get here. It's fine. And I ignored that. So I think that's the biggest thing that I would say for especially females traveling by their own is, you know, use your intuition, use your best judgment. And if you can have some sort of protection on you, even if it's a hot cup of coffee, you do that. You know?
No, definitely. No, it's always good to be plan ahead. And then, as you said, like you have to be aware of your surroundings and have an idea on what's going on, because you never know what's going to happen. So,
yeah.
Cool. So what's left on your bucket list? So 30 countries down, and are there any next, you know, plans?
I'm still trying to get over to Asia and East Asia. Unfortunately, I don't know what that's going to look like, you know, going forward with the pandemic and how long that's going to be. I haven't been down to Africa. That might be something probably in the near future. I have some good friends that have done quite a bit of charity work over. And I mean, I've been on the continent of Africa because I've been to Egypt and I've been to Morocco. But I'm talking, you know, kind of traveling into the full continent itself and going into some of the other countries there. And I have a friend that has a humanitarian project in Ghana that I would love to do and help take part in that. And yeah, I mean, there's 182 countries in the world, or what is it, 190?
I'm not sure on the exact number, but it's about 180, 190 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've only like really just tipped the iceberg on that. So, but, yeah. So I think right now, and right now until I can for sure travel without having to worry about, number one, getting back or bringing something back to my parents. So I'm taking care of who I've been caregiving for the last year. Completing the US, seeing the rest of my country that I live in is kind of my highest priority right now.
Yep.
And then probably South America. I haven't been to Brazil yet. I haven't been to Argentina. I haven't been kind of that far south yet. So I'd love to. That's probably closer on the list right now versus the Southeast Asia stuff.
Yeah, no, cool. Well, now let's do a bit of a deep dive into your book.
Mhm.
So, firstly, what inspired you to write the book?
I just have, and this is actually, I just had so many people constantly asking how I did it and what I did and how, how I could afford to do it, that it just kind of evolved naturally. I didn't really intend on writing that book. When I set off to travel, I have a kind of more of a memoir that I've been working on that hasn't been published yet, but that's kind of more of like the lessons that I learned about myself, how to love myself. That's kind of more of like a relationship, feel good, hippie, like Liz Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love style of book.
Yeah.
The Bare Naked Nomad is more of just like the how to and how I did it. And so I published it originally about 5 years ago. Actually, it's almost 5 years to the day that on the 21st of August is when my official launch was for it.
Okay.
And it evolved from originally, I have, let's see if it's here. So it was originally, this is the approved copy, the original copy, and it was originally called The Unencumbered Traveler. And then just kind of doing some test markets with various college students and things like that. The word unencumbered was a little cumbersome for some of the international market.
Yeah.
And so the Bare Naked Nomad kind of evolved from just the idea of not having anything, kind of being stripped down to your bare essentials. And what would you do if all you had was just a backpack and a few bucks in your pocket? What would you do with that, and where would you go?
Yeah.
And so when I started my journey in Florida, essentially getting the job on that yacht was like a pick up and go type of thing. I had to shove everything that I had inside of the Jeep that I owned at the time. And I had a friend help me put everything in storage. And I literally left the country with $30 in my pocket.
Okay.
She gave me a 20 euro note and was like, here you go, and I'm not saying that everybody should do that. I had a job lined up. It's not like I was just landing into a country and hoping, okay, hopefully everything will work out. I still was hoping, because you never know, especially that type of job where they could be, you could be hired and fired in 2 days because they just don't. There's no HR in the yachting world.
No.
So, so it was a bit of a leap of faith that I had to take to do that. And I think the biggest thing and the biggest point that I have in the book is that if you really want to do something, number one, figure out your why. And my why at that point was to eventually get myself to Europe and to be able to do that genealogy in Poland. That was really important to me.
Yeah.
But when you do that and you have something that's so important to you, the how you can figure out the how, or the how works itself out. And it just continued working itself out. I ended up working in a couple of different capacities. I worked in hostels on part of my travels. I worked and ran a hostel in Budapest, Hungary. And these are all unexpected things that I wasn't really planning. It just naturally sort of evolves as you get out there and you network. I stayed in a lot of hostels to save money. I did couch surfing at that point. As I get older, and my style is sort of changing. Like, I think the hostels are a great way to meet people, especially if you're younger. But since we're talking to like more of a 40 plus age demographic with this group, my next book I would love to write is more of like a how to travel in luxury, but just on a budget. And there's ways of even doing that, whether it's, your house sitting. I've stayed in some amazing properties, house sitting for people. I did some workaways with I married and divorced rather quickly a few years ago. I had about a 2.5 year little love romance that blossomed while we were traveling and then quickly dissipated while we were traveling because it just wasn't. They say if you can travel with somebody, that's like the best way to get to know somebody, which I thought that was true, but it actually wasn't until we got back into our home environments that it was like, when we're not traveling, we're not really, But we stayed in some pretty amazing properties through a workaway program, where I traded like online services, doing, I helped a woman in Lyon, France, build like a retreat page for her business.
Yeah.
And he helped with some carpentry work. He was really good at construction and DIY work. And so we stayed in a beautiful place in Lyon, and we stayed in just on the outskirts in Carcassonne, France. Carcassonne is like a huge castle town built around this fortress. And we were able to stay in this beautiful private apartment for free because we helped paint the inside of the banister while we were there.
Yeah. Cool.
And so we had this amazing accommodations and, the location. And this was, something that would cost thousands and thousands of dollars if you were to go there. So if you've got a little bit of time, it's definitely something that, and you don't mind a little bit of sweat or whatever skills you have to bring to the table. I think it's still a way that anybody at any age could do.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So before we get into more of the tips and ideas, obviously contained in the book, so what do you think holds a lot of people back from actually, making the next step to going off and traveling? Like some people's fears, limitations?
Yeah, I think that fear is the biggest one, which, I think that holds people back from doing anything in life, really. And for me, fear always has an acronym of false evidence appearing real. Yep. Meaning it's a story that you've made up in your head that you don't know if that story is going to come true or not. And I'm a huge believer in, what you think about, you bring about. So the more you focus on the story that has a bad ending, the more you're sort of going to end up down that path.
Yeah.
And what's an alternate story that you could make up? Well, if you could go this way, or it could go this way, and it could be a completely different, amazing experience. And I think one thing about fear is if you're not ready to maybe jump across the entire world on your own, maybe just start with, a city that's 2 hours or 5 hour drive from you, and do a solo trip by yourself in the car to kind of build that muscle.
Yeah.
And that confidence in yourself, because I think that confidence really replaces fear every time. If you know that you can do one thing and you can build off of that, then that sort of diminishes the fear.
Yeah. No, very true.
Yeah.
So, and also, would you say that some people think to travel is kind of like going to be expensive, and so they go, I don't have the money to kind of like go off and travel? So would you say that's a big limitation? Some people?
Absolutely. Yeah. Money and fear, and I think cultural biases hold people back a lot too, just because, and that's to me the exact reason why you should travel. Yeah. So that you can kind of get rid of those biases and get to understand a culture better than what somebody has told you to believe about that location. But yeah, money, what else would hold somebody back? Time is a huge thing. People are like, oh, well, I have a job and I have family and I have all of this. And there's so many people that are saying, you know what, I'm not going to let time be in control of me either. I am going to take control of my time, and I am going to find a way to work while I'm traveling to support my family, versus saying, oh, I can't take any time off of work. It's about taking control of your life and about making decisions for yourself that are going to be most congruent with your goals and what your dreams are and what you want to accomplish, versus letting somebody else dictate that for you.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like travel will give you a new perspective on freedom. So because a lot of people think they're free, but they're not, because as you said, they create all these barriers individually, or they have other people dictating how they can spend their time. So, so what's, in your book, you obviously cover a lot of tips. So what would be some of the top tips you would give for anyone about traveling on a budget?
for our age group, first, I would say set aside your time frame of when you want to leave. So let's say, okay, so I know I want to go somewhere in the next month. Okay. How realistic is it for you to travel in the next month? Do you have a job that you need to get time off for? How much money is that going to cost you? And so forth. So if you want to go somewhere in the next month, more than likely, unless you already have savings set aside for it, you're going to probably have to do a small trip. But that small trip, again, what's something that would be sort of outside of your comfort zone or somewhere that you've never been before that can build that confidence in you so that you can start planning for that bigger trip in the future.
Yep.
As far as long-term travel, it's so easy. Like, just as an example for saving money, I have not really had a phone bill for about 3 years now. And the way that I was able to do that was I found an app. This is when I was living with I'll call him my then husband. I was living over in England with him, and we were kind of starting over in a sense. You know, it was after my book had been released and he was an actor. So we're both kind of starving artists, so to speak, and finding ways to save money. And I found an app that I could download on my phone that gave me free calling to the US and Mexico, as long as I had a Wi-Fi connection, which Wi-Fi is everywhere. And I ended up using that same app for even when I came back to the US, because it was like, well, people are paying $50 to $100 a month. If you have a reliable internet service plan, especially during COVID, where most people are home and online anyways, why pay for a phone bill? And if you were to add that money up over the last 3 years of how much I've saved, now it kind of put me back into the world of like before we had cell phones, where if I was driving, I might not be able to take your call while I'm driving. Which, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion. And I have since upgraded, and they've sort of changed their program a little bit to where I could get a SIM card and put in data so that if I was on the road and I wanted to make a call, then I had that capability to do that. So I've upgraded to paying $20 a month for a phone bill now instead of nothing. But that was just recently as I'm getting back out there and, getting, sort of my digital nomad style of business going again, where you do need to be able to make a call from the road every once in a while or whatnot. But that was a huge saving for me. And I think that like house swaps, that's another tip I have in my book, especially a lot of people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they have homes that you can, just like that movie, I think it's called The Holiday, where they swapped houses. So she was in LA and the other girl was in England, and they both needed a change of scenery. And so without having to spend anything on their accommodations, they just traded houses. And there's so many websites now where you can vouch, and there's people that leave reviews for you. So it's not like just a random like Craigslist ad where you're meeting somebody you have no idea who they are. You can really get an idea of who somebody is from social media, but also some of these websites, and you do have to pay to be a part of them, which I think sort of weeds out the people that are there for nefarious reasons. If you're willing to pay a $30 yearly fee, or some of them are $50 or whatever, to be able to have that sort of tight-knit community where you know that you can trust the people that you're speaking with, I think it's worth it in the long run. And we paid for the service where we were doing their work away. I think that was like $30 a year. And, the places that we stayed were absolutely amazing, and something that, that most people wouldn't even think to do. And of course, another big thing, especially with our age group, would be your credit card points. It's so easy to rack up points so quickly if you have good credit. There's, Southwest was like my favorite airline for a while, because I went and got a Southwest card, and I was flying for $11. All I had to do was worry about the taxes, And Marriott has a really good rewards program also. I mean, there's a ton of frequent flyer miles and rewards programs out there that make travel very, very, very affordable, especially if you're using those cards already.
Yeah.
And if you're doing them responsibly, where you're paying your bills and then paying off your credit card monthly, you're building your credit up quickly and also acquiring points quickly as well.
Yeah. No, definitely. So, well, you were saying before, like hostels may not be a good option for our generation, but in New Zealand and Australia,
Mhm.
I have seen in the past older kind of like our age group, 40 plus, being able to stay there because some of the hostels are kind of like evolved a little bit where they
They
offer
have,
private kind of like rooms if you wanted private rooms, etc. So
right.
some of them are a little bit more upmarket. So I think there's still an option available as well if you're interested in meeting new
And
people.
Airbnb obviously has some great options as well. But yeah, there's a lot more hostels that are coming up. I think because of Airbnb, that's
Yeah,
kind of evolved a lot more since I first started traveling, with one bedroom options. Even if you're in a youth hostel,
yeah,
there's still an option to be there as an adult and have your privacy and get your sleep and not necessarily have to worry about, people coming in and drunk at 3 o'clock in the morning and
yeah,
things like that. So there's definitely, and it also depends on where you are. There's not as many hostels in the US as there
yeah.
are in other places in the world. But in Central America, I think I was in Ometepe in Nicaragua, the little island, volcano island.
Yeah.
I met a few families there that were staying, and they would book basically the hostel room as their family suite.
Okay.
So essentially, like a family of four would get, and they would just reserve the entire room so nobody else could book it for that night, but it was still cheaper than getting a full hotel room.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they still had the option to be able to cook and store food and things like that. So yeah, I don't mean to discount hostels at all because I think it is a great way to meet people. You have a lot of common areas to sort of interact with people and stuff like that. But just my suggestion on hostels is make sure that you research the property
Yeah.
properly before you check in. I stayed at a hostel. I brought my dad out to Europe with me to do this family genealogy trip. This was after my first yacht job, so I had quite a bit of money saved up. So I brought him out, and we did a little traveling. Like, I met him in Amsterdam. We traveled across Europe together for about 3 weeks. And imagine a 65-year-old man
Yeah.
hauling a backpack around with him. And we stayed at a few hostels at first. And the last hostel we stayed at before we just went to private rooms was in Bruges, Belgium. And it was like an 8-person dorm. And I have a photo of him sleeping with his boots on the top bunk because it was the only bed available. And he had to sleep with his boots on because the toilet, I guess, had leaked, and so the carpet was wet. And as an old man, he had to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and he didn't want to have soggy socks, so he had to sleep with his shoes on. And so for me, that was like, all right, Dad, we're doing private rooms from now on. Like,
Yeah.
we're not dealing with this anymore. But I mean, even though that was technically a youth hostel, and they still, they didn't discriminate from him staying there. It's just a matter of what you're comfortable with and what you
Yeah.
want to put up with for the sake of saving money.
Yeah. No, definitely.
So,
So what about traveling solo, especially for females? This is a big concern. A lot of
yeah.
it's a limitation they create. So what are some of the tips and suggestions you have for females, especially in our age group, about traveling solo?
I think an important thing is to let people know where you're going. So you can register with your country, like when you're flying in somewhere, and you can say, you can go online and register that you're traveling there. So the embassy knows where you're at. Your family can contact them if they haven't heard from you. Check in regularly. I used, social media quite regularly while I was out on my own, just to let people know, even if I wasn't calling somebody specifically, I'd say, hey, just landed here, all is well.
Yeah.
Just checking in here, all is well. So they had a constant account of where I was at based on my social media. I would recommend, if you can, to have, I had it taken away from me because I didn't know it was illegal, but I had pepper spray on me for quite a bit of my travels. I think it finally got confiscated from me when I flew into Israel.
Yeah.
And then I was put into questioning for like 2 or 3 hours
Yeah.
based on that. But if you have something that, even a whistle, like I don't know if I have anything on me, but just something to that effect. I also would recommend, and I whether you're male or female, have copies of your passport, digital copies that you can access online. So if your wallet's stolen or anything like that, you have a copy that you can go into a coffee shop or an internet shop and pull up through, a Dropbox file or whatever, to have those documents, and that'll make anything like getting your wallet stolen that much easier.
Yeah.
I also highly recommend that, even if you're traveling solo as a woman, I was never by myself entirely, if that makes sense. I always found people, just as an example, when I flew into Cairo this was the second time I had gone there. And this is actually right after, or shortly after, the whole revolution thing.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a turbulent, scary time to be there. And I didn't really have anybody in Cairo that I knew at that point. And I found on the plane this really, he was a backpacker. I could see all the patches on his backpack. And I kind of latched onto him, and he thought I was a weirdo at first, but I'm like, hey, I need a hotel. I don't know where you're going, but I don't necessarily want to stay at your hotel, but can I travel to where you're going? And then I can figure out what, because that was kind of lack of planning on my part and kind of an impromptu thing.
Yeah.
So that's another point, is proper planning always prevents poor performance, right? They say that in to athletes, and it's the same thing with travelers. If you have something planned out properly and you know where you're going, and that's always going to limit safety concerns. But just in case you don't, or just in case there's an emergency where you don't have that plan in place, find somebody that that looks like you can trust. And when I say just looks, also, once you talk to them, if they're a creep and they say weird, inappropriate things, obviously you don't want to, you probably don't want to do much with them. But just from that gentleman, that conversation that we had, and he was he didn't speak much English. He was from Korea or something, I think. But I could just tell by the amount of patches on his bag that he was an experienced traveler.
Yeah.
And so I got myself safely to Cairo and safely to a hotel, because we were able to share a cab together. And, and he ended up, there's kind of a group of us that ended up traveling to a few destinations in Cairo together. And he was one of those people, just because, I sort of reached out. So if by some chance you are by yourself, find somebody that looks like you can trust. And if you can't, then go to the tourist office or somewhere like that. You don't always have that option. Sometimes you land and everything's closed.
Yeah.
And so you have to think on your feet. I think that that's a huge thing with traveling, especially depending on where you're traveling to. Some places obviously are higher risk than others are. So if you've never traveled before by yourself, I probably wouldn't recommend going to Cairo or to a Middle Eastern country right off the bat by yourself.
Yeah.
I would probably go with a friend or a group of friends. There's a Facebook group that I've been a part of for many, many years. There's quite a few of them. There's solo women's travels, and a lot of those women will get tips from each other, and sometimes they'll meet up and actually travel together in a small group. And it's just sort of a place to check in. There's another group that I've been in called Girls Love Travel. And there's been so many times in that group where if there was an emergency, somebody is posted within that group. And, people you never know how far away you are from people in the
Yeah.
world. And just through one little post like that in a group like that, the situation was resolved within minutes.
Yeah.
So that would be my biggest suggestion, is just, stay connected, do your research, do your planning as much as you can, stay flexible with your plans, because sometimes your plans are not always going to go according.
No.
Sometimes you're going to have flight delays. Sometimes you're going to have flight diversions where you end up in a totally different airport than what you're intending.
Yeah.
And just use your intuition and your gut instinct as much as you can.
Yep. No, awesome. So do you have any other tips, ideas that you can share from the book that you think would be valuable?
Let me see what else we have in here. And this is, again, the original proof copy, so things have changed. And I'm also actually going to be putting out a new edition with some of the changes with COVID and things like that over the last 18 months. Obviously, that's changed travel just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
So I'm going to be putting a new edition out rather quickly as I get the other book ready to launch as well. But let me see. How about language barrier? We haven't really talked about that.
No.
I think that that's another reason why people don't want to travel so much, is because, oh, well, I don't speak the language. And there's so many cool apps that you can download on your phone now. Like, even if you've got an iPhone, you can just literally scan the language and it'll text it back to you in the language that you speak.
Yeah.
I used an app when I was living in Mexico that basically the same thing. I would type in what I needed to say in English and then hit the translate button and it would text it back to me in Spanish. So I had a broken down car in Tijuana that I was able to safely get into a garage, get fixed, and get back on the road without speaking Spanish. So language is a huge barrier for people. And I would say, that doesn't even have to, especially with the technology and the apps that we have, don't let that be a barrier either.
Yep. No, definitely. No, it shouldn't be a limitation. And then you can always end up finding someone who speaks even broken English somewhere along the line, wherever you are. So
university students are great. Even couch surfing is great if you are not planning on couch surfing. If you just want to meet somebody that can sort of be a guide for you for that city and kind of show you around, they're going to be a local, they speak the local language, and at least you have one person that that can kind of help you out there wherever you're going.
No, definitely. So I guess in closing out on about your book, etc., what advice would you say to someone now who's listening to our conversation, our interview, has wanted to travel but hasn't had the courage, hasn't taken the next step? So what would you say to that person?
Just do it. There's so many tools, there's so many resources for you. And again, if you're too afraid to go abroad, outside of your home country, start with a short trip, start with a short road trip. Do something today or next week that's outside your comfort zone, even if it's just going to a restaurant of a country that you've always wanted to go to and you've never tried their food before. Maybe go find a Peruvian restaurant and try their food out. And then maybe that will inspire you to eventually get yourself to Peru one day. So.
No, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So, and then why do you think people should take the time or make the effort to travel?
I just think that so I'm in Utah, right? I said that at the beginning of the call, and there's so many people that have never even been outside of this state, let alone anywhere else in the world. And to me, when you don't travel, you're just so close-minded. There's such a level of compassion and empathy, and I think just life experience and street skills that you gain when you travel that you can't gain or learn any other way. Until you've been on a dirt road, or seen somebody eating off the street somewhere, or you don't really know or appreciate what you have until you've been somewhere else outside of your bubble.
Yeah.
And you just, for me, you come home with such a greater appreciation for what you have, and all of the resources, and you know, like Utah is such a beautiful state, and there's so many places I'd never traveled to, national parks and stuff here in Utah I'd never been to until after I came home from traveling.
Yeah.
That I was like, oh, I should probably go to Bryce. I should probably go to
Yes.
to these places, you know. So
No, no, very cool. So, well, let's change direction a little bit. So what advice would you give to anyone who's approaching 40 or has just reached 40 and is viewing it negatively?
we only get better. We're like wine. We only get better with age. We have so much more vitality, and I think travel makes you younger, honestly.
Yeah.
Anybody that I have talked to that has traveled extensively, is it just gives you a vitality that most people don't have. And I don't know. I mean, if you don't do it, then you'll never know. And if you have, I mean, if you were to, they they do these surveys of people on their deathbeds, you know,
Yeah.
in nursing homes, and the biggest regret that they have is, number one, the biggest regret they have is they've never been on their own. They've never lived on their own. And whether that's living on your own or experiencing life, I think you just, travel gives you that opportunity to just get to learn yourself and what your passions are and what your interests are more than anything else.
Yeah.
And you know, life is, like I said, life is short, or shorter than we think it is, and it's not promised to anybody. So my biggest thing is, you know, if you've got the energy and you've got the vitality right now, go out and make the best of it. And even if you don't, hire me and I'll come and travel with you, or find a companion that can help you make it happen for you. And even don't let that be a barrier.
Yeah. Cool. So, so do you have a life motto or a life philosophy?
My favorite quote is by Helen Keller, and it is, life is a daring adventure or nothing.
No.
And I would just say, make it an adventure.
So, no, very good one. So, and what would be 3 life lessons you've learned in life that you think would be valuable for other people?
Life lessons I've learned are, number one, how important it is to step outside your comfort zone and step outside of your box, because the directions are written on the outside of a box, right? They're never on the inside.
Yeah.
You want directions for anything, they're always printed on the outside of the box. And if you don't get outside of that, you'll never know.
Yeah.
The second thing would be, what haven't I said already? Just smile, just make friends. Don't be afraid to meet new people. Even if they're not, some of the greatest friends that I've had now for, you know, since my travels have been meeting them on my travels.
Yeah.
And so you never know with just one smile, what kind of door that will open up to other people. And the last thing I would say is, you know, whatever fire you have burning inside of you, whether that's a dream that you've had since you were a little girl, that's not going anywhere. And that was put there, in my opinion, by whoever created you for a reason. And usually that leads you to your passion and what your purpose is on this earth, whether that's just traveling and just getting the most out of it, whether it's traveling so you can teach other people, whether it's traveling and being able to help other people on your travels in a humanitarian sort of way. That passion is inside of you, and that dream is inside of you for a reason.
Yeah.
And, you know, so those would be my top 3.
No, awesome. No, very good ones. So, and the last question, what's your definition of living what I call a legendary life or your best life?
Legendary life is I just saw a movie that was put out last week, and it reminded me of a quote of, we all have a song inside of us, and don't let your music die in you.
Yeah.
Meaning legendary life is, you're living a legacy behind, you're living whatever, you're making some sort of imprint or mark on humanity, whether it's big or small. That to me is living a legendary life, is, being, when you hear legends, I think of like, these huge like historical figures or something like that. Those are legends, right? And they're legends because they left a lasting impression on people. They left a story, they left an imprint, they left some sort of change behind them. And so that would be, that's what living legendary to me is.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Leaving your imprint.
Yeah. And as you said, it doesn't have to be big, it can be even small. I mean, all of us have the capacity to leave something behind and make a difference in our own kind of way. So, everyone has the opportunity to kind of like be legendary at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah.
So Liz, it's been wonderful talking to you. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure a lot of other people will get some value out of this, get some insights, and certainly if they haven't had the courage now, they certainly will have the courage now. They just have to kind of like listen to your story. So for anyone who's
kick you in the butt, go do it.
So for anyone who's interested in learning a little bit more about you, how can they find you online?
So I'm rebuilding my website at the moment. Best place to find me right now is either Facebook or Instagram. My Instagram is Bare Naked Nomad. And then you can obviously, right now, the book is available on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. If you're in Utah, there's a couple of local bookstores that you can order from as well. But that's probably the easiest place to find me. And I'm very approachable. So if you need to advice or anything like that, feel free to send me a direct message or anything from any of those handles. My so Bare Naked Nomad I have a separate book page on Facebook for that, or you can find the Instagram handle at Bare Naked Nomad.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Damien. It's awesome talking to you.